everyone, I'm Miranda and welcome to my YouTube channel. Thank you so much for all of your well wishes the past couple of weeks. I didn't feel very well at all, but I was really grateful that I wasn't worse, and I was very grateful that my mum had COVID only very mildly, and we are both feeling much better now. I'm still rather tired, but I'm back doing as much as I possibly can right now, and I'm excited to be sharing a new video with you all, some suggested reads for August. So this is the last month I had to do of seasonal reading suggestions for month by month through the year. I started last September and I'm finishing this year with August. So I now have reading suggestions for every month of the year on my channel, and I hope that you've been enjoying following on with these suggestions. I love seasonal reading, as you know, so it's been a lot of fun to compile these lists. But I've got some great choices for August, so let's get started. Of course, the first one is the Comfort Book Club suggested read for this month. Mum and I will be discussing Father by Elizabeth von Arnim for the Comfort Book Club on the 31st of August. Really looking forward to that. I adore Elizabeth von Arnim's books, and Father is one that has been recently reissued by the British Library Women Writers series, and it's set almost entirely in August. It's a really fun read. There are some more serious issues underlying the story about women and freedom. And it's such a thought-provoking read, but also a very funny one. So I found it a delightful book to return to in August. There's lots of descriptions of hot weather in this too, which makes it a great read for the summer. I won't say much more about it now, as we'll be doing a full video discussion on the book, but it really is a great one to add to your lists in August. And then another Elizabeth von Arnim book that is set in August is The Caravanners. And I so recommend reading this one too. It is also very funny, though I think there's a bit of an underlying chill to this story and a slightly menacing atmosphere, which makes it not so much of a comfort read for me. I found Father a much more light-hearted book actually than The Caravanners, although there is a lot of humour still in The Caravanners. But especially if you've read Vera by Elizabeth von Arnim, then you'll recognise the male protagonist in this book as sharing a lot of similarities with a very sinister male character in Vera. And that really adds to the chill in reading this. But it is also very funny. It's about a German member of the aristocracy and his wife who go on a caravanning holiday with friends and acquaintances of theirs in the UK, and there's a huge culture clash between the German man and all of the rest of the party. His wife really enters into the spirit of the thing and in fact becomes quite emancipated, much to his horror, during this trip. And it's just so well written. It's quite hard to have your main protagonist in a book as someone who is really very dislikable, but somehow Elizabeth von Arnim manages to carry that, and you get really drawn into this rather horrific holiday, which ends early, and the reader knows why, although the male protagonist is of course oblivious to everything, including why no one wants to be on this holiday with him anymore by the end. But there's just so much to enjoy. But like I said, there is also a lot of underlying themes that are quite chilling. Women's lack of freedom in this book, and in a way it also served as a warning for World War I. It was first published in 1909, and Elizabeth von Arnim is sounding some real warning bells in this book in terms of German military expansionism and that kind of attitude that really comes through in the story. So well worth reading though, and it's really hilarious. I love the account of this caravanning holiday in August in Britain. Of course, the weather is generally dreadful and there's a lot of comedy added because of that. But it's just a really thought-provoking read as well, so I highly recommend it. This edition by Handheld Press I really enjoyed too, because it's got a very, very good introduction and some useful notes on the text as well. But I especially enjoyed reading the introduction, which I thought was really good and well worth getting this copy because of that. I also have some old Virago editions and I like the introduction in that too, but this one is a lot more of an in-depth introduction and really goes into the context of the time. So I highly recommend that. Then a real favourite book of mine is The Greengage Summer by Rumer Godden. This is also mainly set in August. It's set in France. It's about some siblings who go on holiday in France, and when they arrive there, their mother becomes very ill and has to go into hospital for most of the trip. So they're very much left on their own. And the two older girls in particular become interested in some of the guests staying at the hotel. And they especially become interested in one British man who is there. And there's a real mystery surrounding him, which the girls don't quite understand. But at the end of the book, all is revealed and it's quite a shocking conclusion. It's especially shocking when you realise that the story was partially based on real life experiences of Rumer Godden and her older sister. It's a real coming of age story. It's a story about girlhood transitioning into womanhood and the loss of innocence that comes with that. There are so many great summer reads that feature themes of loss of innocence, coming of age, like The Go-Between, Tess of the D'Urbervilles, Atonement, The Greengage Summer. Lots of wonderful summer hot weather reads follow these themes. But The Greengage Summer, if you've never read it, is such a classic and I highly recommend it. It's what would be termed YA reading these days, but really I think it's a book that adults would enjoy very, very much as well. So one I really recommend. And then another coming of age, loss of innocence story and another great hot weather, sort of heat wave weather read is The Owl Service by Alan Garner. And I think this one gets forgotten a lot in lots of reading recommendations for heatwave reads or coming of age sort of themed stories. And it deserves to be really a lot more remembered in those contexts because it's one of my favourite heatwave reads. It's such a gripping, such a tense, atmospheric book, and the writing just sizzles as the weather does in this story. It's about a group of teenage friends and this old Welsh myth that keeps being played out generations after generations. There's a sort of fantasy element in this story, and it's quite a scary read. When I first read it, I was little and I was terrified by it, and certainly it really does still give me the creeps a bit, I have to admit, but it's really well worth reading. I also like the Audible version. I like listening to the audiobook of this as well. I think that one is really good. But if you've never read The Owl Service, it's a real classic and also a really good one. If you're going to read The Greengage Summer, for instance, it's a good one that fits into that kind of coming of age, hot weather, summery sort of book. So I really recommend it. And then another book that I think is a great coming of age story as well, so sort of ties in with this reading theme that always feels particularly summery to me, and that's Maude Martha by Gwendolyn Brooks. I just recently read this because it was only just brought out by Faber Editions. I think it was first published in the 1950s. It was first published 1953, and I believe this is the first time it's actually been published in the UK. Gwendolyn Brooks was a famous American poet, and this is her only novel that she ever wrote, and it's really beautiful. The language is so poetic. The book itself is divided up into little, so they're almost like tiny stories, which gives more of a poetic feel to the book, because it's almost like reading a series of stanzas. I mean, the stories are longer than that, but in general the chapters are really very short, and each one gives a different aspect to the heroine, Maude Martha, who is, well, the story begins with her as a very young girl growing up in Chicago. And I want to read just the beginning to you because I think it's so beautiful and it's such a summary sort of start to the book. Description of Maude Martha. What she liked was candy buttons and books and painted music, deep blue or delicate silver, and the west sky, so altering viewed from the steps of the back porch, and dandelions. She would have liked a lotus, or China asters, or the Japanese iris, or meadow lilies. Yes, she would have liked meadow lilies, because the very word meadow made her breathe more deeply, and either fling her arms or want to fling her arms, depending on who was by, rapturously up to whatever was watching in the sky. But dandelions were what she chiefly saw, yellow jewels for every day, studding the patched green dress of her backyard. I just love that opening. It's so summery somehow and so full of the joy and exuberance of youth. Like I said, Maude Martha is about a young black girl growing up in Chicago, and through the story you follow her coming into womanhood, her marriage, and her early years of motherhood. Again, I find this a really beautiful coming of age story, and though it goes through all different seasons and times of the year, there's some great Christmas description in this, and Easter ones too, for instance, but a lot of the summary descriptions just really stood out to me. I think Gwendolyn Brooks captures tiny moments that would seem mundane, but somehow she just gives them this poetic quality. There's a description of Maude Martha loving in the summertime to wash the dishes with the back door open, and you can just almost feel the summer air coming in, and I just love the language that's used in this. It's really, really beautiful. So another one that I would really recommend adding to a coming of age summary reading list for this month. And then a book that I read last year and really raved about, so I know a few of you have already read this one, and that's The Feast by Margaret Kennedy. Margaret Kennedy wrote the more famous The Constant Nymph, but her book The Feast was recently reissued by Faber. They've been doing a lot of good reissues actually. It was of course Faber who also did Maude Martha, but last year they did The Feast, and so it's available in paperback as well with a lovely cover too, but I just grabbed my vintage edition. And this is such a good book. I won't talk too much about it because I've gone on and on about this in the past, but I really recommend it. It's set mainly in August. You know at the start of the book that a tragedy has occurred. Part of a cliff has collapsed onto a hotel. And then the story goes backwards in time a little bit with the arrival of these guests. And the next few weeks play out, and you're just on the edge of your seat wondering who is it that's going to survive the accident, who is not going to survive. And it's just such a gripping, enthralling read. So I really recommend that one. And then I wanted to recommend China Court, a novel by Rumer Godden. This was the Comfort Book Club choice last August. And if you like books that are about old country houses, or if you like books that are set in Cornwall, then I would definitely give this one a go. China Court is a beautiful old house in Cornwall, owned by an elderly woman, a sort of matriarch figure of the family. And at the very beginning of the novel, she in fact dies. Very soon after, her young granddaughter from America arrives, and it becomes clear that China Court is in danger of being sold by the rest of the family. And the granddaughter Tracy really wants the house to remain in the family. What's fascinating about this novel is how Rumer Godden writes about time, and she puts past events in the present tense, and she puts events happening in the present in the past tense. So there's this real feel of the past happening in the same time as the present, these events from the past running in parallel with the present storyline. And it's just a really fascinating way to write about time and this sense of history that you get in old buildings, and all of the stories that have gone before, all of the family members, all the lives lived out in years past, and how those past lives still impact on the present and the future. So really interesting book, and definitely one I recommend picking up in August. Then I always think of Provence at this time of year. I would love to go back to Provence. It's been 6 years since I had a holiday in Provence in August, and I'd love to go back sometime. But in the meantime, I love to read about Provence, and I love books like A Year in Provence by Peter Mayle and Picnic in Provence by Elizabeth Bard, which I've recommended before. And this is another book I've recommended before, but again, if you fancy a bit of armchair travel to Provence this August, then I really recommend Perfume from Provence by Winifred Fortescue. And Winifred Fortescue was actually a friend of Elizabeth von Arnim's, so that's quite a nice connection. This month, if you're reading some Elizabeth von Arnim books, then it would be quite fun to maybe read this too, because they were definitely friends. Elizabeth von Arnim spent some time in Provence. And this is a charming selection. It's almost like little essays in this book, all about the author's life in Provence and what she observed of French ways of life there. So a really charming book to add to your to-be read list. And then I had a couple of children's book recommendations for this month. So first of all, Spellstoppers by Kat Gray. Kat Gray is a friend of mine, and I was really excited when her first children's book came out. And I read it while I had COVID, and it really helped to cheer me up at the time. This would be a great book to give to a child in your life to enjoy for the rest of their summer holiday. It's such a fun, gripping read. It reminds me a little bit of Eva Ibbetson's Stories for Young Children. It's about a young boy who damages anything electric when he touches it, and he doesn't understand why he gets these acute electric shocks and what's really wrong with him. His mum ends up packing him off to spend some time with his grandfather, and there he learns that his grandfather is in fact a spell stopper, and he has inherited the same gift. But the special magical town in which his grandfather lives is being threatened by a type of witch that can transform into an owl. She's the keeper of a castle that's just off the coast near this village, and the magic is going very wrong, and it's making the keeper even more dangerous. So no one in the village can lead very happy lives. Fortunately, there is a happy ending though, and it's just a really fun, fast-paced read for younger readers. So I would really recommend gifting a young reader in your life this book, because it's a really fun one. Then I wanted to recommend The Girls of Friars Rise by Gwendolyn Courtney. This is set almost entirely in August, and I think it's the perfect cottagecore book. If you're into the cottagecore aesthetic or way of life, then you definitely have to try and find a secondhand copy of this. Girls Gone By did republish it a while ago. Sadly, it's out of print again and it is quite rare, but I really recommend trying to find a copy because it's one of my favourite books. I first read it when I was about 12, I think, and I absolutely adored it. Not much happens at all. It's about a large family of sisters, and at the start of the books their parents go abroad, I think to Canada, and they leave the eldest daughter in charge of everyone else. And what happens is near to their farm there's a little cottage that's stood empty for a very long time, but a young man who is in very poor health arrives, and the girls' sort of motherly instincts are awoken, and also their urge to just do a lot of domestic tasks, and they essentially remake his entire cottage. And the book is mainly just descriptions of them cleaning and like making curtains and quilts and baking and doing all that kind of thing. So really hardly anything happens in it, but I adored all the domestic detail when I was young, and I admit I still do. I just recently reread this, and if you love anything about cottage life, then this is definitely a lovely book to read, and it's just a very soothing, comforting kind of story as well, and very sweet. And then my non-fiction suggestion for this month is A Sultry Month, Scenes of London Literary Life in 1846 by Alethea Hayter. This is actually mainly set in June and July of 1846, but it was only very recently reissued by Faber again, and I wanted to draw your attention to it because this is just a wonderful summery hot weather read generally, and I found it absolutely fascinating. I love the little start of the blurb at the front. It says, June 1846, as London swelters in a heat wave, sunstroke strikes, meat rots, ice is coveted, a glamorous coterie of writers and artists spend their summer wining, dining and opining. And it's just a really interesting book. There's a lot about the Carlyles, about Elizabeth Barrett and Robert Browning, about famous artists of the day, as well as some of the politics of the day too. And I really enjoyed reading it. It really brought London to life, London of the 1800s for me, and I found it a very fascinating read. It was apparently one of the first real group biographies. It was first published in the 1960s, and I thought it was really excellent. I enjoyed the foreword by Francesca Wade as well. She wrote Square Haunting, which is one of my favourite modern group biographies. So yes, if you want a bit of heatwave inspired reading, then I would definitely recommend this one. But anyway, those are all of my book recommendations for August. I hope you've enjoyed this list. Do let me know which book in particular appeals to you, which you would most like to read from these, or if you already have a favourite from this pile. I'd love to know if you've already read one of these and if you enjoyed it. But thank you so much for watching. Extra big thanks to all of you who pressed the super thanks button on my last video. Your generosity is always so much appreciated. But thank you to everyone for all of your support from comments and likes, and of course through watching my videos as well. I hope you've all been having a wonderful summer, and I hope you have a lovely rest of August. And I'll see you again very soon. Goodbye.